Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions regarding this watch. Do you remember the Jaeger-LeCoultre ad campaign that posed the question, have you ever worn a real watch? At the time, I thought it was kind of pompous, but then again, since the company was making watches like this concurrently, maybe they had a point. Today, we're looking at a model that debuted back in 2005. This is the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Grand Reveil. Now, the original Grand Reveil came out in 1989, a perpetual calendar with alarm. It was a tremendous concentration of useful complications. It was all highly idiosyncratic, though, and that was the problem. The thing looked a little bit like a potato with eyes or a hog with warts. This is far more conventional in shape, but even more capable in engineering, so we're going to get to that. I think this is one of the hottest looks you'll ever find. Rose gold with a black dial, and it's got a lot of presence on the wrist because it's 43 millimeters in diameter, 16.3 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 51.6 millimeters with a nice and broad 22 millimeter spacing between the lugs. By the way, I will mention that I think this one was quite literally made in 2005 because it features a buckle that was only shipped with this watch for one model year. So I do believe that this model debuted in 2005, and because this has a single fold clasp rather than a twin fold, this is quite literally a 2005 manufacture example of the watch. But the reason I don't already own this, now you're going to find out, is the size of it. It's a big watch. Now, in terms of style, it looks exactly like the 2001 Platinum, Rose Gold and White Gold Master Grand Reveil. That watch was a 41. This is a 43, so this is just a little bit too large for my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. As you can see, it is thick, though that's not the limiting factor. It's really going to be the lug-to-lug span, which from this angle, you could see is taking up most of my wrist. Now, could I pull this off? Maybe. I'm going to let you decide whether this looks right on my wrist. My hand is large. I'm not a small man. I am thin, though. So if this looks good for you, 16 and up. If this doesn't look right, then I'm going to say entry-level wrist for this watch, 17. The strap is high grade. As you can see, it's an unconventional cut of leather, as we have sort of a non-rectangular medium scale. It's black, it's a matte finish. There's a lot of bolstering to give it volume down the center, and then it slopes off at the shoulders where you've got a monotone stitch, a sheer cut edge that's been lacquered for cleanliness, and then you can see on the bottom alligator leather. Now this does appear to be a strap from a different generation of Jaeger-LeCoultre, leading me to wonder whether or not perhaps this strap has been with the watch since its original retail. It may never have been worn by the original owner. You can see that the JL logo on the bottom, Jaeger-LeCoultre still has a similar logo, but it isn't embossed on the strap like that anymore. So a fascinating little view into the way we were at Jaeger-LeCoultre. You can also see that we have a curved spring bar here, so there's no impediment to the motion of the strap against the case. So while the watch is large, the strap's not going to fight you. Again, the buckle. The first generation JLC folding clasp was completely flat. This side was flat, this side was flat. Whereas the second generation, which was used up until 2005, it had this little recess where one part of the swing arm could recess into the other, and it snaps shut with a friction fit that is quite resilient. So you do get quite a bit of security when it's on the wrist. So if you see these components flat, first generation clasp. If you see this media blasted channel down the center, second generation. If it's double fold, third generation. If it's got a quick release on the bottom to pop off the strap without a tool, then fourth generation. So that's what we've got externally. It is rose gold to match the case. Taking a look at the case, it is quite severe. All JLC watches of this era seem to use one case design. Now, the proportions and the size varied from model to model, but in general, it was a variation on this design, which led JLC watches in period to look a little bit brutalist, and I'm not going to argue the point here. It does, however, have very narrow lugs when viewed end-on, so it's not without elegance, and there's a very subtle soft bevel along the edge of the lugs that expands towards the tip. Yes, we have two crowns. And as you can see, JLC thought of everything, as there are little kerfs below the crown so you can dig your nail in to operate. There's a pusher adjuster on the flank for the Perpetual calendar. This is the IWC mechanically programmed Kurt Klaus system. IWC had a major objection to the idea that you would have to set the watch with anything but the crown. And JLC, in its version of the movement, had a major objection to the idea that you could accidentally advance a month with a few turns of the crown when you really meant to set the time. So what JLC did was, when they built their version of the Kurt Klaus, they separated the crown from the adjuster for the calendar. So when you push this little index, it comes with the tool, you start jumping the date, which jumps the day, which jumps the month, which jumps the moon, which jumps the year, which jumps the decade. So this is a mechanically programmed perpetual calendar. If the watch stops for 4 days, wind it up, set the time, hit that 4 times, everything is programmed in sync. You don't need to look up anything, much less look up the moon phase. So this is a mechanically programmed perpetual calendar. One note, you don't want to overrun the current date because you'll have to stop the watch until time catches up with you. Another note that's important, a lot of times you see these for sale and you'll see that it's years or even decades behind the current year or decade. You can get through that with the IWC version because of the quick set and the crown, but on the JLC version, because of the pusher adjuster, if you see one of these that's years or decades behind the current date, time, moon phase, year, and decade, that's going to have to go back for service because this thing will not hold up to, say, 6,000 individual presses while you advance from years before to the current day. So always make sure that the year and the decade on one of these JLC systems is reasonably current, because the pusher can take hundreds of pushes, just not thousands of them. Now on the dial, black, beautiful, with faceted rose gold indices, and the hands are alphas, which I find considerably more elegant than Dauphines. They don't look as heavy. Also note that these hands, because it is a dark dial base, the hands have been half frosted for better contrast, and perhaps surprisingly, the watch does have a decent amount of luminescence. You can read the time, at least, in the dark. Now, a couple things going on in this dial. Of course, it is a perpetual calendar, so you don't need to touch anything until the year 2100. And the IWC system is particularly comprehensive, giving you the year and the decade, and then the century beyond that is set manually by the watchmaker when the time comes. You also have a 24-hour dial down at the bottom. Now, note you have horizontally opposed northern and southern hemisphere moon phases, and then there's another indicator, a little red lacquered hand that indicates where you are in the 24-hour cycle, and that warns you not to use the calendar setting pusher when you're in the danger zone. So the danger zone for our purposes is going to be from 2100 to 3 a.m. So that's where you don't want to use this little pusher to set the calendar. Everywhere else you should be okay. So this is not for cave explorers to know AM, PM. It is so you know when you're in the danger zone. And frankly also, so when you reset the watch from a stop, you know whether you're setting it to the correct day-night sequence. So, for example, your watch isn't jumping its calendar at noon. Now, we also have registers for the day, the date, the month. You can see there's another little indicator here that has nothing to do with the time, and that is the vibrate or ring control for the alarm. So this is where this watch departs from the 1989 Grand Reveil and the 2001 Grand Memovox. Mechanically, those prior two watches were identical. This one has something that's a little bit more. It has the ability to change the sound of the alarm. So when it's set to vibrate, you feel it more than hear it. And when it's set to ring, you hear it more than feel it. So I'll demonstrate how that works now. It's a classic JLC Memovox. Fundamentally, this is a JLC built version of the Kurt Klaus Perpetual on top of a 918 automatic Memovox movement. You can always stop the alarm by pulling out the crown and moving the setting wand, which is red-tipped. So the reason this sounds as good as it does is because the gong in this watch is bronze, and it is a hanging gong, which is to say, instead of doing what a traditional alarm watch does and just striking the edge of the case, this has a separate hanging gong, a little bit like a minute repeater. Now, it doesn't have a strike governor like a minute repeater to slow it down, but it does have a freestanding resonator that is not simply the case, which is why it doesn't sound like a chirping cricket or a rattling bug. It sounds like an alarm. It sounds like an alarm clock, and you better believe it's loud enough to wake you up, which I consider to be an absolute requirement for any alarm watch, and this passes with flying colors. Now, one feature it does have is a hacking or stop seconds function. On the reverse side, you can see this watch has been through the Master 1000 hours control. So whereas the COSC test is a bare movement for 2 weeks, this is a 41.6-day test in 6 positions of the fully cased up movement and the assembled watch for chronometry, durability, water resistance, winding efficiency, and power reserve. So the Master 1000 hours control, inaugurated in 1992, was one of the first in-house standards to go substantially beyond the COSC, and so this benefits from that. As you can see, 5 ATM water resistance, still push down crown, so don't swim with it, but as a dress watch, solidly more than the 3 ATM standard that you expect from a dress timepiece. Now, what else is going on inside? Well, automatic winding, 45-hour power reserve, 4 hertz beat rate. You've got the stop seconds, the sequentially programmed perpetual calendar, the ring vibrate alarm, a 36 joule automatic movement. Remember, it's the 918 plus the Kurt Klaus. It's been through the Master 1000 hours control, and it is 6 position adjusted, which is a real feather in its cap. Being adjusted in 6 positions, that's 1 more than the chronometer standard, giving inaccurate running no standard position in which it can hide. 5-position watches often keep great time in 5 positions, but the watchmakers can sort of hide all the problems in that one untested position. And so, for example, if you wind up with the watch like this on your dresser and that's the untested position, it's going to lose or gain a lot of time. 6-position testing leaves no margin for error. This is one of the coolest looking watches, packed with features, one of the best values in complication that you will find. If you've got the wrist for it, then I have to pose the question, have you ever worn a real watch? Come and get it. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase, pricing, and availability details.